Okay, so today I'm going to talk a little bit about sign design. I'm going to walk you through the Illustrator techniques needed to do 3 different types of signs. And so first what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you examples of the signs I'm talking about. So the first one is creating a 2-layered sign where you have offset text here. And so that means having this outer border. And being able to do this technique, there's about 1,000 different things you can do with it that's not just exclusive to signs. So that's one technique. The other is this more basic type of design where you're just creating, or you have a round or some kind of shape, and then you're going to have different text and images just sort of cut out and sort of spaced out on the design. And then the third one is this inset type design. So I'm seeing a lot of these lately and people have a lot of questions about this idea, so I'm going to walk you through that as well. So let's start with the more basic design, which is just something like this. I have an example here, but I'm actually going to walk you through from start to finish. So let's go into Illustrator and let's create a new file. And the first thing you're going to want to do when you're doing this is you're going to want to measure the actual round or the shape that you have. I have a lot of rounds, I buy them at Lowe's, and the ones I have are 14 inches. So I'm going to set my artboard to be 14 inches. You can have more than one artboard if you want to practice a couple different designs, so I'm going to hit 2 here, set that to 14, make sure I'm at inches, and then I'm going to hit create. So that's going to bring up 2 different artboards here. So the first thing is to sort of figure out what your text is going to be, and I'm just going to write something really basic here. So I'm going to write home, sweet home. I'm going to make it bigger so you can see it. And now I have to pick my typography. So I'm actually going to come over to this sample file, and I'm going to copy this over, paste it here so you can see it, and I'm just going to see if I can scale that down, but it doesn't look like it's going to let me. If you find you don't have enough room for some of the content you have, you can adjust your artboard size. Anything that's not in the artboard, the first artboard, when you export this file, will not show up in the Glowforge interface. So I'm going to hit my artboard tool, and then just going to open this up so we can see the type, and I'm going to talk you through a couple of these different typefaces here. So picking your typefaces is sometimes the hardest part. There's a lot of places to get free type, and there's also places where you can pay for different type. So some of these are paid. I believe I paid for Lavendaria. I paid for Master Blush. This is a very popular one. This one I think was free. I can't remember if I paid for this one, and then I believe these 3 are also free. They have a couple different qualities that we're going to want to talk about. This is one of my main go-to ones, this Bato Shine. I'm not really sure if that's how it's pronounced, because it's very thick, so it holds up well when it's cut out, and it doesn't have any really tiny delicate pieces that will break off on the ends. So for example, in this one here, Master Blush, which while it's really popular, it has these really thin areas, so if your text is not big enough, these little pieces are going to easily snap off, so you have to be careful about the size here. Lavendaria is one I use a lot for wedding invitations. This is one of the main types people tend to really like, and it has a lot of sort of swashes at the end that you can adjust. Aphrodite is also pretty nice. I use this a lot for wedding invitations. It's got some of these delicate areas, but I think at the right scale, and because the items tend to connect back to the design, you're usually going to be okay. Now this is a typeface where I would be careful about using this other than engraving. And if we zoom in, you'll see why. So while it has a nice shape, it has a lot of texture in it that if you tried to cut this, is just going to burn through your design and it's not going to work. So I wouldn't recommend that one. This one here has a nice sort of even, very geometric kind of style, and it doesn't have a lot of change in thicks to thins here, so it may have the right feel that you're looking for a specific type of design. That's something worth noting. Now this one has the same problem as the one above, the Brownhill script. You have to be careful about these open areas. So this is something that I would only choose for engraving. So for example, these 2, I'd be really cautious about using those 4 signs, and you're going to want to zoom in and really look at your type before you make your selection. So let's work with maybe one of these ones I have here. So one thing you can do in Illustrator is if you actually set up a file like this and just set up all your type where you can kind of select it and kind of look at them as a sample sheet, you can take your eyedropper, select your text, and then click the text, and it's going to copy that content over. It's going to copy that style in both size, color, etc. over there. So let's do that. I'm going to hit enter and enter again. I'm then going to scale this up. I'm going to hold shift and I'm going to click up here so it will jump by 10 points versus going one at a time. So let's get up to an even number. Let's start scaling that up. And then I'm going to open my text box. And if I want to, I can actually just adjust the leading here to get them a little closer together. But in this case, I think I want the middle word to be a little bit bigger. This is just a really fast example, so this isn't necessarily something I would use. I'm going to make that larger. I'm going to increase the space above. And there we go. So let's hit that, go to paragraph, and center it. And let's just pretend that that's a completed sign design, that I'm happy with that. Now, the next thing I want to do is, even though I have this square at 14 inches, which is the size of my round, I actually want to create a circle that is the size of the round because I want to make sure that none of the type is going to fall off of the circle. So I'm going to go to my shape tool, and you can click and hold to find a different shape if you're looking for something else. And then I'm just going to click once, and that will bring up the ellipse dialog box. I'm going to hit 14 and 14 so that I got a 14-inch circle. If this is linked and then you change the size, it'll change both to whatever the proportions are. So example, if I had it 5 by 15 and I hit this and then I change this to 14, it's going to scale that. So instead I'm going to uncheck, hit 14 by 14, I'm going to click OK. And then I'm going to swap this to the outline by clicking this arrow, just so I can see through it. I'm going to put that on my artboard, and that's just going to give me a sense of what I'm looking for and like my size. So I see I can go a little bit bigger here. So with Illustrator, if I try to scale up just by holding shift, it's just going to change the size of the text box. But one weird little trick is if you have a little object like this circle here and then you grab it, it will scale because it has an object in the group that you're scaling. It's like a really weird thing you may never really have to encounter, but I don't want to set this to outlines yet because I may want to edit this text, so that's one really fast way to scale intuitively versus doing it like this. Especially since I actually have two different type sizes, I can't just overall select everything and really scale up because it's going to all jump to be the same size. So now I can see that kind of fits. Maybe I actually want to change this center word here to a different one. So I'm going to go to Lavendaria. And I have a couple different ones. I'm going to hit sturdy. I'm going to bring that down in size until it fits. Or I'm just going to widen the text box. And there we go. So now even though it's centered technically, it doesn't really look centered. And I can fix that at the next stage if I would like. So I'm going to probably adjust that after. Something I want to show you is sometimes when you're working with a text like this, you're going to have an issue. So watch this. If I type in text, you see how I get a really weird E, like the E that's supposed to be on the end of a word? I can fix this pretty quickly by going to my Glyphs panel. So I'm going to highlight that E. If you don't see your Glyphs panel, which is this icon here, you can go to Window, Type, and then Glyphs, and that's going to pull up all of the characters within a typeface. So if you need an accented character, or if you know that there's unique swashed character alternates that you want to grab, you can do that from here. So now I know I need this E, so I'm just going to double click that over the highlighted E, and it's going to correct that. So if you know your typeface has some unique swashes, or for example, you're working with something like minion ornaments, which is an ornament typeface where you're not going to know what letter corresponds to which design, you can open it up in Glyphs, and then when you want to use the character, you just double click it and it's going to bring it into your text box. So that's something not a lot of people know about. That's really helpful in Illustrator. Once you're done with your sign design, and I know this is not a particularly great one, but it's just for the purpose of showing, when you're done with that, you're going to need to set your type to outlines. And you do that by selecting your text and going to Type, Create Outlines. And now this is where a lot of people stop, and this is where they start to have a problem. So if we zoom in, you'll see that because this cursive type actually overlaps, you're going to have these little areas that are going to cut out. So if you took this right into the Glowforge interface at this time, these little pieces are going to slice out and it's not going to look very nice. So with that text still selected, I'm going to go to my Pathfinder tool, which is this one here. And if you do not see that, once again, you can go to Window, Pathfinder, and I'm going to hit Unite. And you can see now, if I zoom back in, all of the characters are fused. So now at this stage, let's say I want to adjust that sweep because it doesn't look centered. Now it doesn't really matter because I'm going to nest these in the Glowforge interface and then arrange them by hand. But if, for example, I wanted them to be perfectly aligned, I can now ungroup my design and I can grab these two pieces and I can just move them over until they seem visually centered. So even though it's not mathematically centered anymore, it looks maybe better. I don't really like how this is meeting up, but it'll be fine. So this is example 1, and then when you're ready, all you would have to do is go to File, Save As, and I actually prefer a PDF over an SVG. I find the SVGs, which are really a container file, they sometimes upload at a random size, and then you have to still adjust the size in the interface. With PDFs, I don't have that problem. So I always personally just save everything as PDFs, and I would just call this sign 1, and then hit Save. And remember, only the first artboard is going to upload. So all of these extra artboards and anything that's not on an artboard is not going to show up in the Glowforge interface. It will only pull the first artboard. So if you need to save your artboards separately, you can also do that by going to File, Export, and then Export for Screens. And then you can actually say, okay, I want to export all of my different artboards and I want to export them as a PDF. And then select where you want to save it, and it will save these each as different files. So if you had like 6 or 7 sign designs inside of here, then you could export them all separately, and we'll come back to that. So now I'm going to delete that, and I'd like to go with the second sign design. So if you, the first one here was just a very basic design. Of course, you can have all kinds of different clip art and artwork here. The next one is to do this sort of offset design. So let's show you how to do that. I'm actually going to go back to my artboard tool, and if I would like to make like a variation of this design, I can just copy this artboard and paste it, which it's not letting me do at the moment, or you can hit Alt and drag it. And now I have a copy of that artboard, so I can, without deleting or damaging any of this content, change this one here. So let's actually just take our home sign, or our home word here I should say, and let's create an offset of this. So I'm going to grab these, I'm going to hit Command G to regroup them so that I don't accidentally pull them apart. And I'm going to scale this up. So once these are no longer editable text, they're a lot easier to sort of scale. So if I want to create that sort of shape that runs along the outside, so I'm not going to really need this circle anymore, all I have to do is offset my path, and this is actually really easy. So I'm going to go to Object, Path, Offset Path. And the offset path, this is really great for also doing pressure fitting. You've probably seen this in one of my printing tutorials if you've ever read them. I'm going to hit Preview, and then I'm going to choose my offset. So if I say 0.5 inches, you can see it's showing me the offset. And this is so much better than trying to hand draw around here and get an even shape. It's also better than scaling up, and that's not going to work, so I'll show you why. So the offset path looks really nice here. I'm going to hit OK. And then you can see it actually made it in 2 pieces because these were 2 separate objects. While it's still selected, I'm just going to unite it. And then I'm going to switch it to an outline, and now you can see the offset for the path. So that's really, really easy thing to do there. Now let me show you what happens if you try to scale instead. So I'm going to Option drag, and that will copy it. I'm going to ungroup, and I'm going to delete that outer piece. And now some people's instinct might be to do something like this. So if I have a circle, and I copy and paste that circle, I can just scale the circle bigger, and that will also create an offset, but it does not work well for more complex shapes. So if I were to take this, hit copy, and I'm going to actually paste in place so it pastes exactly where it is. So you can hit paste in place, and then if I were to scale it, you can see it doesn't create like an even offset. It does not create an even offset. It's going to create something, of course these are always popping up. it's going to make something that's sort of like kind of the scale, but there's no way to really get that even shape. So if you're working with like a very simple square or geometric shape, you won't really you can do an offset just by scaling up, but it's not going to work for something like this. You're going to need to go to Object, Path, Offset Path. And you can adjust this as you need. You can also change how it's going to join, and this matters when you have more geometric shapes. So let me show you what might happen with that setting. I'm going to go to my star tool. And sorry if you can hear the cat screaming in the background. That's not much I can do about that. Oh, this is different. I've never had that happen. Let's click once. It looks like the radius is set to 0, and that's why. So if you get like a weird shape like that, you might just have to click. I'm going to say 2 inches. There we go. Now we actually have a real star instead of whatever the heck that was. Now I'm going to scale this down. And I'm going to offset path again, and this is going to show you that other setting there. So offset path, preview, and now you can see my offset path has nice sharp points. But if I don't want nice sharp points, I can go to round, and it's going to give me rounded edges. I can also go to bevel, and that will give me beveled edges. And there's different reasons you might want one or the other. For example, for this, I might want a nice soft shape so that it's just not so sharp on the edges for whatever I'm using. So just keep in mind that you have that option, and you can adjust the miter limit here. It sort of will change the look of it. So if I hit 2, sometimes it'll look a little different. You kind of just got to keep an eye on how it's going to look. With this, it's looking pretty much the same here. So I'll click OK, and then you can see I have my offset shape, and I still retain my regular shape. So that's sign example 2. Now, the third one is a little more complex, so I'm going to create a new artboard. This time I'm just going to select my artboard tool, and I'm going to hit New, and it's just going to automatically create a new one of the size that matches the one I had selected. And now this is that design where you have the text that runs through a design and is kind of inset. So I'm going to create a text box here, and I'm going to create the word sample. How that is, I don't even know how to exit that, good lord. Okay, so I have my sample here. I'm going to set this to a different bolder typeface, and I'm going to hit probably Go Bold here. I'm going to open this up so I can see it, and I'm going to scale it down. And now let's say that I want to have some kind of text run through it. So actually, I think this might be easier to see if I just do one letter. So let's take a giant S, and scale it up. I'm going to just guess that about 900 is going to probably be plenty big enough. Perfect. Now, once I'm done with that, I actually do need to set this to outlines. So type, create outlines. Now this is a shape. And now I have to create my cut through text. So let's grab one of these samples over here. Paste it into this artboard, and I'm going to change the color so I can see it better. So now I have it as a nice blue. Let's scale it up, open the box, get that a little bigger, and sort of adjust that right here. So let's say that that's what I'm actually looking to do here. Now I'm going to have to set this one to outlines as well. So type, create outlines. And I'm going to fuse this first. So the next step is to make sure that I remember to unite that shape. And now I have to get it to cut out of this shape, because if I were just to try and bring this into the Glowforge as it was, you'd see that it's going to cut the black shape behind this shape, and then it's going to slice it into a bunch of different parts, which is not what I want. So this is probably one of my favorite tools in Illustrator. I use it all the time, and it's the Pathfinder. So we've learned to use the Unite, but there's a lot of other things we can do with it. So if we were to grab this like this and hit minus front, it's going to chop the shape on top out of the shape behind. We can also create an intersection, and in this case it's not letting me do it. Sometimes it's a little funny about what shapes you're using, especially if you have more complex shapes. So if you get that error, you might want to try something else. Divide is really the main one here. So with divide, by clicking that, it doesn't really look like anything happened, but it did. So now anywhere that there was an overlap, it has sliced the shape. And this is essentially what you would get if you just ran this through the Glowforge interface. But after doing that, all I have to do is click my magic wand, grab all of the blue, and then reunite it. And now you'll see, if I set both of these items to outline, so let's grab the blue one first. It looks like they're grouped. Let's ungroup them. And then set that to outline. And then set this one to outline. You can see that it's actually cut the shapes out. Now for this piece here, the only reason those did not change the outline is because they're not grouped. Right now everything's ungrouped. So I'm going to go back, use my magic wand, and unite those shapes as well. So now if I take these apart, just by dragging them apart, you can see that this one now has the shape cut out, and I have this inverted version here. And so that's pretty much it for creating that style of sign. Now let's say that I have all three of these signs and I'd like to bring these into Glowforge interface. I'm going to save these all separate PDFs. I am going to delete that circle since I don't want to cut that. It looks like everything's good here. I prefer to, like, while I'm actually in the interface, to set everything to outlines and change the colors so that I know kind of what I want to do. Another thing you sometimes want to be careful of here is with a shape like this, you may want to have that separate. It depends kind of what you want to do. So if I'm trying to save space, I may do something like that because I don't want to, like, waste all of that space having a perpendicular kind of like shape like that. It looks like, do I have a weird little shape here? Okay, so I had a little lonely guy there. I'm just going to delete him. So it looks like everything's good there. Here I'm going to change the color of this by ungrouping. I'm going to set that to orange by swapping those and then hitting none. These two, I'm going to set those to green and then inverse that. And then same thing here, all of these can be the same. I'm going to set those to magenta and then reverse that. So now I have 3 different artboards. I've set all of my steps by changing the colors. I'm just going to delete the stuff that's not necessary. And I want to export all 3 of these designs as a separate item. It doesn't really matter what the artboard size is as long as all of the artwork's on it. So File, Export, Export for Screens, and then I don't need this artboard, so I'm going to uncheck it. I'm going to select PDF. I don't have any bleed, but I can leave that, it's not a problem, and then I'm going to save that to the desktop. And it's going to export all 3 artboards. So if I go to the desktop, you'll see I now have artboard 1, artboard 1 copy, because I didn't name them, and then artboard 4. So these are all ready to go right into the interface and be cut out. So hopefully that kind of explains a little bit about sign design. Let me walk you back through the steps just really quickly. 1, selecting your text. It's really easy when you create new text to just use your eyedropper tool to copy different styles. You can use your artboard tool to create different artboards and or enlarge and change the sizes of artboards. When you're setting your active text into a shape, you go to Type, Create Outlines. And then when you want to sort of play with how they overlap, you're going to want to go to your Pathfinder tool, which is really great. Another really useful tool that's usually somewhere hidden in here is your Alignment tool, which will allow you to align objects. So if you wanted to align them together or, you know, center things, again, let's say I wanted to center all these different little pieces. Let's group these, because otherwise they're going to, like, I won't group that one just so you can see what will happen. If I grab that and hit Align to Artboard and then hit Center, they will center themselves on the artboard. Now these ones, because they weren't grouped, kind of broke apart. But this is another really great tool. If you can really learn any tools to really understand Illustrator for the Glowforge, all you really need to understand is the Type tool, the Shape tool, the Pathfinder, and the Alignment tool. With those 4 things, and maybe just a few things in kind of these little object panels, you're going to be able to do pretty much anything you really need to do. So we have this one, And this one, they are now complete, and I think that sort of covered everything. The only thing I forgot to re-mention was, remember, for offsetting paths, you could go to Object, Path, and Offset Path. So let me know if you have any questions or if there's something else you'd like to cover, but hopefully that was just a quick overview of how to get maybe 3 different types of sign design.